Thank you for joining us on our journey here to preserve the history of mixed martial arts. When I wanted to take on this project, I needed help. I brought in one of my favorite matchmakers, Miguel Iturrate, and the MMA Detective, Mike Davis. So to do this, we've been able to preserve history. Welcome and enjoy.
Hey, Miguel Iturrate back here on the Lights Out podcast, and we are on a new segment of the Mixed Martial Artifacts. I'm joined by collector extraordinaire Ed Thiesen, and Ed has joined us here to take a look at the UFC 30 canvas. Ed, how are you, sir?
I'm doing good. How about yourself?
Terrific. Glad to have you aboard here. So, how do you get your hands on a canvas, the UFC canvas? What usually, how'd you come across this UFC 30 canvas, and what makes UFC 30 significant?
Well, UFC 30 marks the first event when the new ownership, Zuffa, actually purchased the UFC from SEG. So that's when the Fertitta brothers and Dana White became the manager of the UFC. And how I got this is kind of this canvas was actually, I believe, taken after the event from Big John McCarthy. I imagine they were going to be throwing it away, and he a lot of times would keep items, if that was the case. So he had it at his house, I believe in the San Diego area, and a friend of mine, an old collector, the original collector that I had met many years ago, purchased it, or he was given it. I don't know exactly the details on that, but then he had it for a number of years. He ended up selling it to another guy who put it in his basement and set it up like an octagon. I believe you'll be displaying some pictures of how I did send those, but he had it sitting in his basement for, oh God, maybe 10, 12 years. And it ended up getting really moldy, and they were going to pitch it. They were actually going to throw it away. So one day my friend Jeremy from San Diego called and just asked if I'd be interested in having it, but he was concerned about my health because he thought it might be dangerous with the mold and stuff on it. I said, just put it in a box and send it to me. I'll pay for the shipping. I just want this. I would not want to see it thrown away. So when I got it, he was right. It was a big mess, full of mold, mildew, stunk, toxic. I put it out in my driveway. I got a number of different cleaners, and I totally cleaned everything off of it. And now it's preserved, and it looks pretty good. It was cut up a little bit. They did cut the center of it, but I also have all of the advertising that was also around the perimeter of it. So I do pretty much have the complete canvas, but it's in about 7 pieces, but at least the big center is all intact, and it looks pretty good.
And that's an awesome story. So you got it free shipping because they were going to throw it away. All right, so that's a labor of love to save this thing.
Yeah. It took a few hours of cleaning, but believe me, it's worth it. It's a very significant piece, especially to the Dana White and the Fertittas in Zuffa. It's just surprising that someone didn't keep things like that back in the day, other than Big John. Big John, if that is the true story that I was given, he did, keep things, which was a pretty good idea.
Yep. So let's go through this. The UFC 30 was the battle at the boardwalk, and it took place in the Trump Taj Mahal, Atlantic City, New Jersey, an 8-fight UFC card. So we are still in ancient history. As Ed mentioned, it was the first Zuffa UFC. Opening bout, Sean Shark and Tiki Gosen. Second bout of the evening, Phil Baroni and Curtis Stout. Third bout, Bobby Hoffman and South African Mark Robinson. Pedro Rizzo and Josh Barnett, a classic heavyweight bout there. Elvis Sinisic's circling defeat of Jeremy Horn. Fabiano Iha beat hook and shoot champion Phil Johns. Jens Pulver and Kyle Uno, I believe that's the rematch. And Tito Ortiz and Evan Tanner were the main event, and Tito won that one. So definitely a who's who, early UFC, a lot of champions, a lot of big names, and in that era, there really wasn't 15 or 20 people in the UFC. If you were in the UFC roster, you were one of the top guys.
Yeah, and there were some pretty good fights. I revisited UFC 30 on Fight Pass just to kind of try to remember a few of the events. And I just thought that Pedro Rizzo and Josh Barnett fight was probably the best fight on the card, in my opinion. I like the heavyweights. Pulver and that Uno, they had a really good fight as well. And there was 2 championship fights. The Pulver Uno was a championship fight, and Tito and Evan. Tito and Evans, I remember that fight. I wasn't present, but I remember watching on pay-per-view, and it was just a little disheartening to see it end so quickly. I was more of an Evan Tanner fan, than I was a Tito, and I was hoping he would have done a little bit better. That was a quick slam, and it was a quick end to the main event. So frustrating.
We got the canvas that took that slam, and you mentioned the Barnett Rizzo fight. An interesting side note on that one. Barnett would be a future champion, and he was still a young fighter at this point, and he came in and went right at Rizzo, and they had a slugfest, and Rizzo, with his skill, eventually knocked him out. And I talked to Matt Hume, Barnett's coach, afterwards, and he goes, "Wrong game plan. The next time we stare at him for 4.5 minutes and then beat him up for 30 seconds." And that's how they would beat Rizzo, with a game plan, but they didn't have a game plan yet. Barnett would become a guy who game plans a lot of stuff later on. So I think it was a fight where he learned a great deal, and we get more of Josh Barnett on. Probably the best fight of that card. I think he nailed it.
Mm-hmm.
So the editor's been putting through here some of the pictures of the UFC 30 canvas, and some of the pictures of the UFC 30 that we captured. You get to see a young Dana. You get to see the canvas in Ed's driveway at some point in some of the pictures and stuff. So definitely a good piece. And where would this go in an eventual MMA museum? Are you going to have like a section? Do you have more canvases? Or is there going to be a section of this type of thing? Because this is big. This takes up a lot of space too.
Yeah, I was watching some videos the other day, and they were showing the UFC headquarters office building. And they have an original old canvas hanging in there on one of the walls. And I believe it's the full canvas. It might be from the 25th anniversary fight in Denver back a few years ago, or it is one of the original, real early ones. I just noticed it by watching a video, but this would definitely display really good front and center when you walk into the museum. It's not quite as big as it would be if it was the full canvas. So it's definitely manageable to find a place somewhere on a wall.
And without revealing any details, do you have more canvases in the collection?
I do. I have probably a dozen canvases.
Fascinating. So this has been another episode of Mixed Martial Artifacts with Ed Thiesen, and we hope to keep it going next week with another fantastic item. And we'll see you then. Thank you very much, Ed. Thanks for joining us. Any closing comments as well?
Well, just hopefully this new year brings some better things in the MMA world. It kind of started out a little rocky, but let's hope things improve.
Yeah, 2023, we're at the very beginning of it, and hopefully big things for collection and history out there. Less negatives out there. I agree with you, Ed. Thank you very much, and that's a wrap.
Check out the full interview on iTunes, Spotify, and all major podcast platforms.